If you're still awake, there's probably a reason. This is Boring History Nights, where history doesn't speak loudly, but long enough to hush the dark. You didn't come here for answers, maybe not even for sleep, maybe just to be somewhere soft. Here, the stories don't push, they float, like frost in moonlight, waiting to settle. The air doesn't move. Somewhere, a chair creaks, or maybe it's just your breath brushing the quiet. Dust lingers mid-fall, as if history paused. Whatever warmth you carried, it wouldn't have lasted the night. Let's not stretch this too fast. If something about this quiet spiral makes the night pass easier, you can subscribe. Only if you'd want to hear the next one drift by. And if you're still awake, say where the night found you. I read them all, even the ones that don't remember how they got here. Now let the dark stay dark. Let whatever follows arrive slowly, like it's always been here. You don't have to keep up. Just listen. This is Boring History Nights, and you're already inside it. You never knew exactly when the first frost would come. There wasn't a bell to warn you, no announcement from the sky. Just one morning, a single breath met the air and came back visible, as if the world had decided to speak in steam. It didn't arrive like a storm. It arrived like doubt slow, creeping, and already inside you before you noticed. You wake up, and your breath fogs beneath the rafters. The inside of the window is slick with something between mist and memory. Your fingertips, stiff and slow, reach for the wool beside you. But even the blanket carries a chill that feels older than you. You don't remember falling asleep cold, but you remember dreaming about heat, and that, somehow, is worse. The cold has no interest in your calendar. It ignores saints' days, ignores the village bell, ignores the rhythm of your chores. It simply steps in. You try to sit up, but your limbs argue. Not with pain, not yet, but with reluctance, as if they know something you don't. The wood of the bed creaks under your weight, a dry, sharp sound that slices through the quiet like a snapped twig. Outside, something groans, or maybe it's just the wind beginning to test the walls again. The morning offers nothing warm. You swing your feet down onto the floor, and it greets you like ice in disguise, stone or dirt, depending on where you live. But either way, the message is clear. This is not your house anymore. It belongs to winter now. And winter is not a generous landlord. Your breath ghosts ahead of you, curling through the air like it's searching for a way out. The walls, made of whatever was available wood, daub, perhaps even scraps of cloth stuffed into gaps, offer no comfort. They don't trap warmth. They trap time. And this morning, time feels sharp and heavy. The fire is dead. Of course it is. You didn't expect it to live through the night. Wood is scarce, too precious to keep burning while people sleep. You saved the logs. You saved yourself. That's what they said. But now, in the pale hush of dawn, you're not sure who won. You cross the room, each step a small act of defiance. The coals are black and collapsed, like a memory of heat that forgot its purpose. You poke at them with a stick, hoping. They do not glow. They do not stir. Even the ashes are cold. Somehow that's the worst part, not just the absence of fire, but the indifference of its remains. You crouch beside the hearth. You don't light it yet. Not because you're not cold, but because fire has to be earned, and it's still too early for that kind of hope. The cold hasn't fully shown its teeth. Not yet, but it's watching. You pull on yesterday's clothes. They're stiff at the sleeves, and somewhere, a seam splits slightly when you bend. The cloth feels damp, not because it's wet, but because it forgot how to be dry. Moisture lives in these walls, in the fibers of your tunic, in the place behind your knees where the cold always seems to find a home. Your fingers hesitate on the belt, not out of pride, but out of routine. You're binding yourself for another day you didn't ask to greet. Outside, the light is the kind that doesn't promise anything. Gray, smeared along the horizon like a guess. The kind of morning that doesn't arrive so much as apologize for not being night anymore. The door sticks. You press your weight against it. It groans, then gives not with welcome, but with resignation. You step outside, and the earth greets you with frost like lace, delicate, deceptive, and absolutely uncaring. Your breath fogs again, and this time you watch it drift. It curls in front of your face like a whisper that doesn't want to be overheard. You're not alone out here, not really. The animals have begun to stir. You hear a chicken shuffle behind its coop, a pig snort from somewhere nearby. They wake because they must, just like you. But none of them know cold the way you do, because none of them walk into it with bare ankles and promises to keep. You take the bucket and head toward the well. Each step crunches slightly. The frost crackles beneath your boots, if you're lucky enough to have them. If not, each patch of frozen mud stings like a secret, one you've stepped on before and will step on again. The rope at the well is stiff. You draw it up hand over hand, breath slow, arms already tired from the cold you haven't named yet. The bucket emerges, and the water inside is skinned with ice, thin, delicate, already reforming as you break it. You lift it with both hands and carry it back. Careful. It's not just the cold that threatens to spill it. It's your fingers numb, clumsy, slow. By the time you reach the door again, you feel heavier, not just from the water, but from the quiet. Because winter is not loud. It does not storm, not always. Sometimes it just settles in and stays like a guest who brings nothing and asks for everything. You set the bucket down, you kneel by the hearth again. You take one splintered piece of wood and one bit of last year's news, a paper fragment, a list of prices, maybe even the edge of a letter someone once hid. You strike the flint. It doesn't catch. You strike again. The spark jumps, then dies, as if embarrassed by its own optimism. The third strike holds, just long enough to kiss the paper. You blow, gently, the way your mother once did, the way she taught you, as if breath was the only thing the fire needed to remember it had a purpose. It grows, slowly, like a child waking from fever. Then it curls up around the wood like a secret that finally found someone to trust. The fire lives. For now, you sit beside it. Not close, not yet. You watch it. The way someone watches a sleeping dog that might bite. You don't trust it yet. You don't want to. You've been disappointed before. But the warmth, when it comes, is real. It touches your face, like a story that meant something to someone once. You close your eyes, just for a moment. Outside, the frost thickens, the air tightens, the cold grows teeth, but for now, they're not pointed at you. Inside this room, for a few minutes more, the war is paused, and the blanket you'll reach for soon doesn't know it lost. The fire breathes now, if only just. You watch it like someone watching a child take its first steps, unsure if the warmth will grow or retreat. Unsure if this flicker will carry the weight of the room or collapse into ash before it can remember how to glow properly. You know better than to trust it, even as it reaches for the underside of the kettle and licks at the edge of the soot-black hearth like it belongs. The heat is real, but it is shallow, the kind of warmth that never touches your back, the kind that barely reaches your knees. It gives the illusion of comfort, but only if you don't move. And in a house like this, in a season like this, stillness isn't safety. It's simply a longer way to freeze. The walls of the cottage do nothing to help. They were built from mud and hope and whatever timber the landlord didn't need that year, not to insulate. not to defend, not even to resist. They were meant to outline space, not protect what was inside it. You press your hand to one now. It feels less like a wall and more like a cold breath waiting to be taken. The damp has seeped in, not from the rain, but from the air itself. The plaster is swollen in places, cracked in others. Beneath the thin layer of clay and lime, you can feel the ribs of the building thin wooden laths that gave up trying to resist winter long ago. There's a saying in the village, don't trust a cottage that doesn't creak. But this one doesn't creak, not because it's sturdy, but because it's tired. Even the wind doesn't bother rattling the door anymore. It knows the cold is already inside. Your boots, still damp from the frost-glazed path to the well, sit by the door. They won't dry. Not today. Not even if the fire catches properly. They're stitched from cracked hide, softened by too many seasons and too little wax. You glance at them and think, not for the first time, that they look like something that used to protect someone but doesn't anymore. You wonder if you look the same. There is no chimney in this house, just a smoke hole that never stays open long enough. The soot marks crawl across the upper beams like ghostly roots, blackening the corners with the memory of 100 failed attempts at warmth. Sometimes, when the fire grows too bold, the smoke hesitates as if confused about where it should go and gathers inside the room until it curls into your lungs, into your clothes, into the skin behind your ears. You're not sure if it makes the room warmer, only less breathable. Still, you kneel close to it, because there's nowhere else to be. The floor beneath you is packed earth, not floorboards, not tiles, just dirt that's been stepped on enough times to forget it was ever wild. There's straw in the corners, meant to trap moisture or cushion a fall or convince the rats they're welcome in only one part of the room. None of it works. The air feels wet even when it isn't. Coal doesn't need water to move. It just needs space. And this cottage has too much of that. Even the roof feels like a betrayal. Thatched from reeds cut last summer and lashed down with twine soaked in salt and silence. It lets the cold breathe straight through. Sometimes you hear it sigh, not like a beam creaking under weight, but like a tired person exhaling through their hands, whispering something no one was meant to hear. The thatch lets in sound and draft. And once last December it let in a snowflake so perfectly whole that you thought, for a moment, it was a message. Then it melted on your shoulder, and the moment passed. You wonder what it would have said. There are windows here, though barely, just a pair of small openings, covered with oiled parchment that's more shadow than screen. Glass is something you've only seen once in the chapel, where the priest keeps his Bible behind a tiny round pane the size of a teacup. Your house doesn't deserve glass. It barely deserves the light. When the wind presses against the parchment, it flutters inward slightly, as if the entire wall were breathing in a cold, dry gasp. The corners of the room hold other truths. A basket with a hole chewed through one side. A wooden spoon worn thin at the edge from too much scraping against too little broth. A stool with one leg that rocks even when you try to sit carefully. A pile of kindling that you've started measuring in emotions rather than weight anger. Hesitation, mercy, resignation. You once wept over the last of it and then burned it anyway. There's a hook on the wall, empty. It used to hold your father's cloak. Now it holds only the shape of it, the idea of cloth. The shape of someone who left and didn't take the memory with them. You haven't touched the hook in 3 winters. Your eyes drift to the ceiling. It's lower than you remember, but you've grown. Not taller, just heavier with years. The beams look close enough to touch, but you know better. When you reached for them as a child, they felt like sky. Now, they feel like consequence. You wonder how many people in this village live in houses like this. You wonder how many of them think of it as shelter, or if they simply think of it as the only space between wind and bone. Out the back wall, there's a small lean-to where someone once kept goats. It's collapsed now. No goats, no walls, just 2 poles and a memory of hay. You still go out there sometimes, not for warmth, but for privacy, as if the ruins of things once useful might still protect something invisible. Maybe a thought, maybe a version of you that wasn't always so quiet. The cold doesn't knock, that's true. It creeps in through the past, through your assumptions, through the places no one thought to seal. It lives in the knots of the wood, in the dust between the beams, in the way your breath pauses before you speak, because even talking means giving away warmth. And in a house like this, warmth is not a comfort. It's a currency, and you are always in debt. The fire holds. It doesn't roar. It doesn't dance. It doesn't try to prove anything. But it breathes, slow and orange, its glow curling just far enough to kiss the stones beneath the kettle and stain the edge of the wall with a faint golden haze. You've seen stronger flames. You've seen better fed hearths in homes with proper chimneys, dry stores of wood, and more hands to feed it. But this one is yours. It didn't vanish. Not this morning. You sit near it because it is the only source of control you have. You poke at it with the iron rod, watching how the small logs blacken, how they shift into themselves, how the warmth is never quite enough. You know, even as you watch it grow, that this heat is too shallow to reach the back of the room, that the warmth will never stretch to the bed where your sister lies curled beneath layers that still aren't enough. The fire isn't cruel, it's just small, and small things, in a winter like this, are rarely forgiven. You shuffle closer, letting the warmth settle into your knees, your elbows, the skin between your knuckles. It doesn't sink in right away. At first, it lingers on the surface, making your chilled fingers throb with the slow ache of returning blood. It's a strange kind of pain, not sharp, but relentless, like memory being pulled through frozen limbs. Eventually, the ache fades, replaced by something that could almost be called relief, if you don't ask for too much of it. But the rest of the cottage doesn't feel this. The fire does not reach the threshold. It does not reach the far wall, where your mother once hung her drying cloth, back when the air still had enough warmth to carry steam. Now the cloth hangs heavy and sad, a useless weight that sags on the line like a mouth that forgot how to speak. The fire doesn't reach the corners where the wind sneaks in, whispering through the wall's seams, where bits of straw and lint twitch softly in the draft. A constant reminder that you live inside something porous, not solid. The fire doesn't reach the bed. You glance over. The figure beneath the blanket hasn't stirred. The fabric rises and falls slowly, but her face, what you can see of it, remains pale, even in the dimness. You know what that means, and you know there's nothing you can do about it this early. You know she didn't sleep much. You heard the cough again in the night, not deep, not dramatic, but thin and tired, like a voice worn down to the thread. You wanted to get up, to check on her, but it was too cold, and you didn't want to wake the fire. So you stayed still and listened instead, each cough mapping itself onto the walls. There's food on the table, a crust of yesterday's bread and a scrap of something you're trying to pretend is cheese. It was softer once, now it's harder than the table beneath it. You cut it anyway, not because it'll feed you, but because the act of cutting something feels like defiance. You place the bread in your mouth, and it tastes like memory stale, dense, dry in the way only old things can be. You chew slowly, as if speed would make it disappear faster, and you're not ready for it to be gone. You reach for the wooden bowl beside you. There's water inside, not hot, not even warm, just water. It carries a strange chill, like it absorbed the quiet from the room while it sat. You drink from it anyway. You don't wince. There's no point in reacting to cold anymore. It's not an event. It's a condition. The back room, if you can call it a room, is darker still. You haven't been in there yet this morning. No reason to. There's no fire to build in there. No light to chase. No comfort to offer. Just old tools. Damp straw. A crate that once held potatoes. And a folded cloth that used to be your father's apron. You think about going back there anyway, just to move your body, just to tell the house you still own all of it. But instead, you stay by the fire. You stay because warmth is fleeting, and movement is expensive, and you don't know how much heat the morning has left to offer. You glance up toward the rafters. A spider's thread dangles near the beam, catching just enough light to shimmer once. Then it vanishes back into shadow. You wonder how many other threads are up there, how many invisible lives cling to these bones of wood and straw, waiting out the same cold. You wonder if they feel it, or if smallness grants immunity to discomfort. The walls close in slightly, but not because they move. It's the fire's glow, it defines your world. A little circle of light surrounded by the not light, and everything beyond the circle feels less real. That's how winters were described once, in an old story you barely remember. A child and a lamp. A shadow that kept the stars from speaking. You never heard the end of it. The dog is still asleep, curled tight beside the door, its body pressed into the same corner it always chooses, nose tucked beneath tail, ears flicking occasionally at the wind's soft insults. You haven't fed it yet. You're not sure what there is to feed it with, but you envy it not because it's warm, but because it's mastered stillness. A sudden gust outside rattles something, maybe the woodpile, maybe the shutters on the neighbor's house. It passes quickly, but it leaves a silence behind that feels somehow newer than the silence that came before. You hold your breath for a moment, listening, as if expecting footsteps. But no one comes. No one ever comes this early. Not during a medieval winter like this. Not when the frost has crawled through every path and field, when the trees themselves seem to lean away from the roads, and the sky forgets how to color itself. You think about the day ahead. You try to plan it. There will be no market, the path is too slick, and you have nothing to trade. The water might need boiling. The cloth near the fire needs turning, so it doesn't mold. You'll sweep the corner near the bed, where the ashes drifted yesterday. You might even venture to the neighbors if the wind dies down, not for company, but to ask for salt, or just to speak to someone who isn't yourself. But all of that is later. Right now, the fire still reaches your knees. It does not reach the door. It does not reach the window. It does not reach your sister's feet. But it reaches you. And for now, that's enough. If your eyes are fading, let them. The story wasn't waiting for anyone. The fire still burns, faintly, soft around the edges. But it's not lonely, not entirely. Around it, things are beginning to breathe again, not from comfort, but from rhythm. The house moves in cycles, even if no one is truly awake yet. You've started to notice it, the gentle creaks of timber settling into itself, the muted drip of thawed condensation slipping from thatch to floor, and most of all, the slow stirring of what lives alongside you. You never thought you'd share your home with this many animals, not because you minded them, but because as a child, you thought barns were for beasts and houses were for people, and that the two worlds weren't meant to mix. But that was before you understood how warmth changes rules, how winter rewrites boundaries not just between fields and roads, but between species, between lives. between where something belongs and where it simply endures. They're already there when you rise from the hearth. The dog, curled in its shallow nest of rags near the door, opens one eye to watch you but doesn't move. It knows the fire isn't strong enough to justify action. Its belly rises and falls beneath fur that once gleamed in summer, but now dulls with soot and smoke. You don't speak to it. Words cost breath, and breath means losing heat. But there's something in the way you glance toward it, a nod that doesn't require sound. You step toward the back corner, toward the partition. It isn't a wall, just a row of crates and an old blanket nailed into place. A soft attempt at separation that fools no one. Behind it, the animals rest not in stalls, but in shared space, in corners lined with straw and lined again with whatever dry cloth could be spared. The air there is warmer, not because of fire, but because of breath. The goat is awake. She shifts when she hears you, hooves scratching gently against the earth-packed floor, her movements slow but sure. Her eyes gleam in the half-light, reflecting nothing except the fact that she is alive. And that is more than enough. You place a hand on her side. She doesn't flinch. The heat of her body surprises you, not because you've forgotten what warmth feels like, but because it feels undeserved. You wonder if she thinks the same of you. Beside her, 2 chickens stir beneath a shared cloth. You didn't mean to let them sleep inside at first, but frost took 3 of them last week. And by the time you'd found their stiff shapes curled beneath the coop steps, it was already too late to do anything but promise the rest they'd be safer closer. Closer to what? You weren't sure firewalls your guilt, but you followed through. The pig is the last to move. He lies near the far end, belly flattened to the earth, legs tucked beneath in that strange way pigs can fold into themselves like sleeping stones. He smells. He always smells. But even that feels warmer now, pungency layered with straw. A scent that insists on staying even when you open the window flaps for fresh air. You wouldn't trade it. You've learned that the stink of life is better than the perfume of cold silence. You crouch there, among them, just for a moment longer than you need to. There's a peace in this corner that you rarely find elsewhere, not because it's cleaner, or safer, or more private, but because everything in it breathes. Together. Slowly, with purpose, with quiet need. You inhale through your nose and try not to shiver. Even now, it doesn't take much for cold to find the base of your spine. It's strange how you ended up here sharing sleep with goats and chickens, waking to the sound of snouts and hooves. As a child, you imagined adulthood with a roof overhead and a bed of your own. That part came true, technically. But the bed is a mattress of straw wrapped in threadbare linen. The roof leaks, and the bed isn't only yours, it's shared with blankets that remember rain, lice that forgot how to die, and sometimes, on the worst nights, the slow thump of a tail beside your foot. But what choice was there? In a medieval winter, warmth is not a thing you find. It's a thing you borrow from fire, from breath, from fur. From the body of anything willing to lie beside you long enough to remind your skin it still matters. They call it surviving, but some nights, it just feels like bargaining. The animals don't question it. They don't resent the loss of their own space. They don't mind your footsteps or your movements in the dark. They understand something most people forget, that heat moves better in groups, that silence isn't the absence of conversation, but the presence of trust, and that the difference between a stable and a home is sometimes only a single wall that no longer keeps things out. You straighten up slowly. Your back aches, not from injury, but from posture, from the habit of leaning, hunching, curling into yourself against the cold. You look around the small enclosure. No nails hold it together, just twine and boards. and an agreement between walls not to collapse today. There's a small tin bowl near the corner. Inside is water, or what used to be water. The surface is glossed with a thin layer of ice. You break it with a fingertip, then recoil at the cold, not out of surprise, but in protest. You pour a little of it onto your hand and offer it to the goat, who drinks slowly, with gratitude that lives more in her breath than her gaze. Your sister hasn't called for you. That's good. Or it isn't. Sometimes silence is rest. Sometimes it's something else. You return to the main room, and the fire is still breathing. You poke it once more. Feed it a splinter of bark, nothing more. You don't want to burn too much this early. The animals stir again behind you, but you don't turn. You wonder, not for the first time, whether this is normal, whether everyone lives like this now. You remember overhearing a traveler, once a man who stopped in the village for half a day before continuing on toward the coast. He spoke of houses with glass, beds with feathers, chimneys taller than trees. You wanted to ask him if those places still let the animals in. You didn't. You were ashamed, not of the cottage, but of how much you needed it. You crouch again by the hearth and stretch your hands toward the flame. It's not as warm as the goat's side, but it's steadier. You close your eyes and listen. To the sound of breath behind walls, to the shuffle of hooves and the scratch of claws, to the slow return of morning, and to the unspoken truth that sometimes the only difference between surviving and surrendering is which side of the fire you sleep on. You return to the bed not because it's inviting, but because it's familiar. The fire holds for now. The animals have settled. Your sister, still buried beneath a mound of fabric, has not stirred in any significant way. The air in the room remains cold enough to see your breath, and every surface your hand grazes feels like it has spent the night outside. You approach the bed with quiet steps, not from any sense of reverence, but because too much noise this early feels like breaking something fragile, not just her rest, but the balance the house has made with the cold. You lift one edge of the blanket, and it clings to your fingers, heavy and damp like it resents being moved. The cloth doesn't rustle. It sighs thick, slow, and reluctant, the way old linen sounds when it has absorbed more seasons than it was ever meant to carry. The blankets aren't many, and none are new. There's the outer layer wool, mottled and fraying at the edges, smelling faintly of mildew and faintly of sheep, though the latter scent is older now, more memory than presence. Beneath it is a woven quilt, its once vivid patterns faded into something that looks more like bruises than colors. You remember it from childhood, not because it was warm, but because your mother used to fold it slowly, deliberately, as though each crease held some secret she didn't want to say aloud. At the bottom lies a linen sheet, worn nearly translucent in places, stitched and restitched by hands that knew how to extend the life of cloth beyond reason. It's patched in corners with scraps from other lives, a square of old apron here, a sleeve cuff there, a history sewn into silence. These blankets weren't chosen, they were kept. And now they're kept together, a mismatched pile of effort and resignation. You reach beneath them and feel her forehead. Not hot, not cold, just dull. Her skin doesn't resist the touch, but it doesn't welcome it either. That's what worries you more than anything. Fever would mean fight. Chill would mean danger. But this absence of temperature feels like her body is trying to forget what it means to respond. You don't wake her. You smooth the blanket back down, gently, and tuck the corners around her shoulders. Though you know the gesture does little. The blanket does not warm her. It merely covers her. It might hold in what little heat she has, but only if the air doesn't steal it first. And in a cottage like this, air is always stealing. The blankets you use at night never truly dry. Not in winter, not in a house without steady fire or sun-baked walls. They hang during the day, sometimes, by the hearth or against the back of a chair, and you turn them dutifully, watching as the steam curls from their folds, like ghosts leaving a place they no longer want to haunt. But the moisture remains. The wool drinks in the damp from the walls, from the floor, from the breath of everyone and everything living inside this tight, sweating shell of a house. The term dry becomes relative. You learn to judge warmth by degrees of wetness. A blanket that only clings at the edges is better than one that presses dampness into your chest. One that smells only faintly of mildew is preferable to one that stings the nose with rot. You remember nights where the entire bedding seemed to weep with you, as if even the fabric could not endure the cold in silence. Some days, when you hang the quilts outside for what little sun there is, the corners freeze before the center even has time to breathe. They flutter stiffly in the wind, like flags from a forgotten country, one where no one wanted to live. But everyone did. You beat them against the wall, not out of anger, but out of ritual. The sound, that dull, rhythmic thud, becomes part of the winter soundtrack, alongside coughs and creaking and silence. There's a chest at the foot of the bed. It's old, warped at the hinges, and stained along the lid with rings of moisture where candles once rested too long. Inside are scraps of cloth too small to sew, too torn to use, too soaked with memory to throw away. A bonnet string from your grandmother, the hem of a curtain that once hung in a better house, a torn shawl your mother used to drape over the firewood, as though it could convince the logs to catch more quickly. You reach inside, not to take anything, but to feel the texture of memory. Everything is damp. Even time feels damp here. The cottage, in winter, becomes less of a home and more of a container for waiting. You wait for fire. You wait for warmth. You wait for your sister's cough to go quiet, not because it stops, but because it no longer has the strength to rise. You wait for morning. You wait for spring. And while you wait, the blankets continue to remember rain. You wrap one now around your shoulders. It clings to your tunic, the wool scratchy and slick, like moss on stone. You feel its weight press into your collarbones, a gentle accusation. Why haven't you boiled water yet? Why hasn't the fire been fed more? Why isn't there more to offer? The blanket doesn't speak, but it judges. It judges by staying cold. You sit by the hearth again, hunched now beneath this ancient armor of woven threads, and try to coax the fire to life again. You poke it, feed it a twist of dried grass, a sliver of bark, a prayer not spoken. It answers slowly. The flame rises, then collapses, then rises again, reluctant but obedient. You hold your hands out, palms down, not too close, because you've learned what happens when frozen fingers meet sudden heat. The pain is worse than the cold, always worse. A reminder that warmth must be earned carefully, slowly, and never demanded all at once. You think about those who live in stone houses, or those whose fireplaces are large enough to cook more than one thing at a time. You think of furs, of thick woven cloaks lined with fox or deer, of rooms where fire is a companion, not a stranger. But thinking about those things too long is dangerous. It leads to resentment, and resentment burns colder than frost. You glance once more at the bed, at the shape beneath the pile of blankets, still unmoving, and feel a small knot form in your chest. Not panic, not yet. Just awareness, the way one might feel a storm begin before the sky changes. The house is still. The fire is cautious. The blanket on your shoulders smells like a barn that never finished drying. And somewhere, deep in the folds of the bedclothes, your sister breathes faintly, rhythmically, like someone trying not to wake the past. You sit a little straighter, because even now, even here, the cold has not won. Not yet. You wouldn't call it morning. Not yet. Not fully. The light outside has shifted, yes, but the shift is timid, as if the sun itself is unsure whether to show up today. The gray that creeps through the cracks in the shutter isn't hopeful. It doesn't brighten. It simply changes shade from ash to smoke, from mist to cloud. It's light that hasn't made up its mind. Inside the cottage, nothing has changed enough to warrant a new name for the hour. The fire still pulses low. The walls remain unwilling to hold warmth, and your sister sleeps in the same position she did an hour ago, wrapped in that heavy pile of wet thread memory. You begin to wonder if time even moves in the same way during a medieval winter, or if it simply folds in on itself, forming loops of breath and silence and waiting. You step outside not for need, not even for chore, but to confirm that the world still exists beyond the walls. The door resists you at first. Its swollen wood warped from weeks of condensation and repetition. When it gives, it does so with a dull groan, as though disapproving of your decision to greet the day before it has fully become one. The air meets you like a question you don't want to answer. Cold, of course, but not biting. Not yet. It's the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself with pain, but rather with the slow withdrawal of sensation. Your fingers begin to fade, your breath thickens, and your eyes blink more slowly than usual, not because you are tired, but because even blinking feels like something that should be conserved. The sky is a smear. No sun, no stars, just a dull silver canopy pulled low across the horizon, flattening everything beneath it. Trees become silhouettes. Distant fences dissolve into haze. You hear no birds, see no movement, and even the wind seems reluctant to disturb the stillness. You walk a few steps, not many. The frost crunches beneath your boots, that thin, dry sound that says the world froze just enough to be inhospitable, but not enough to preserve anything. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster calls. It sounds tired, or maybe it's just far away. The village remains asleep. You see no chimney smoke, no open doors, no footsteps but your own, and yet you know others are awake not with energy, but with necessity. Somewhere, someone else has crouched over an ember and whispered it into flame. Someone else has broken the ice on a basin, wrung out a cloth that never fully dried, stirred a pot that held more hope than ingredients. In a medieval winter, no one wakes early from choice. They rise because the cold doesn't wait, and neither does the hunger that walks just behind it. You turn back towards the house, not because you're finished, but because you've confirmed what you needed. The outside isn't better. You close the door behind you, slowly, carefully, as though sealing off a dream you didn't want to return from. Inside, the air greets you with something marginally better, not warmth, not truly, but less hostility. You let your body breathe out, shoulders dropping as you return to the center of your small, shivering world. The fire has settled again. It flickers with a kind of patience, now no longer trying to prove itself, only enduring. You sit by it and stretch out your legs, flexing your toes inside your boots, feeling the sting of sensation returning, not with kindness, but with warning. You pour a little water from the bucket into a small pot and place it near the fire's edge. You don't expect it to boil quickly. It may not even boil at all, but the ritual matters. The act of trying matters. You stir the pot with the same spoon you've always used, the one with the slightly curved handle, worn smooth by years of stirring too little food with too much effort. It feels familiar, anchoring. Your sister coughs. It isn't a sharp sound. It doesn't echo, but it cuts through the room like a thread snapping, thin and unmistakable. You glance over. She hasn't moved, but the blanket twitches near her chest. You watch for a moment, count the rhythm of her breath. Note the way her fingers curl slightly beneath the edge of the quilt. You don't move toward her yet, not because you don't care, but because you've learned the difference between a cough that needs comfort and one that just needs time. Still, you shift slightly, adjusting your position so you can see her without turning your head. Your presence matters more than your touch, sometimes. You think about the days ahead. There are no feasts coming, no holidays. The only calendar you follow now is the one the fire keeps. How many days it takes to run out of wood. How many mornings before the last of the salt is gone. How many nights before the ache in your back demands a real bed and not the floor beside a goat. You remember summers vaguely. You remember fields that smelled of sunlight, bread that rose without coaxing, water that flowed instead of stiffened. But in the middle of a medieval winter, those memories begin to blur. Not because they aren't real, but because they feel like they happened to someone else. Someone warmer. Someone not made of layers and silence and sighs. Time passes slowly now, or maybe not at all. You watch the pot, waiting for steam that may not come. You listen for the rooster again, but the call doesn't repeat. You count your breath, and it doesn't help. You try to remember the last time you laughed, and your mind offers you silence. The night may have passed, but the day hasn't begun. This is the space in between, when light arrives, but warmth does not. When time moves, but meaning stalls. When you are awake, but not yet living. In this moment, you realize something that has hovered beneath your thoughts for days. Maybe longer. The worst part of winter isn't the cold. It's the absence of momentum. Everything slows. Bread takes longer to rise. Skin takes longer to dry. Words take longer to form. You don't sing. You don't argue. You don't even think in full sentences. You become a quiet version of yourself, wrapped in damp wool and cautious hope, shuffling from one task to the next, not to accomplish anything, but simply to outlast the waiting. Outside, the light finally shifts again, brighter by a margin so narrow it almost doesn't count. But it's something. You rise, slowly, stretch your legs, your knees pop, gently, like twigs giving way underfoot. You move toward your sister, checking again. Her breath still comes, shallow and steady. You whisper her name, not expecting a reply. She opens one eye. You smile not from joy, not fully, but from relief. A thread just tightened again. The room feels more whole. She closes her eye again and sinks back into the warmth she's made beneath the blankets that remember everything. You return to the fire. The pot steams now, faintly, enough to notice. You wrap your hands around the bowl and close your eyes. And for the first time that day, you think, this part might end. Eventually. You hadn't planned to bake today, but there's something about the thinness of the morning that pushes you toward the table. Something about the way the light leans through the window and lands barely on the patch of counter where the flour sack sits, slumped against the wall. It isn't hunger that moves you. Not exactly. It's the habit of doing, of attempting, of performing rituals that suggest forward motion even when you know the results won't change. You untie the sack with fingers that are still stiff from the morning's cold, and the flour inside releases a faint cloud as if exhaling. You move slowly, measuring without measuring, pouring a modest pile into the wooden bowl that still bears the ridges of hundreds of past kneadings. There is no yeast, of course, not in the way wealthier households would know it. What you have is sour, a remnant from the last loaf, a clinging bit of dough set aside days ago, now grown pungent and slightly gray, but still willing. still capable of coaxing another round of life from this powder. Water, lukewarm at best, is added. Salt, if you can spare it. A small handful of dried herbs, perhaps. Not for taste is a luxury, but because scent can create the illusion of warmth. And warmth, even imagined, can be a mercy. You mix, your hand curls into the dough slowly, the chill of the flour bleeding into your fingers as you work it into something that resembles effort. The texture is uneven, sticky in places, dry in others. The bowl rocks slightly with your movement, and the sound it makes, that low, hollow rhythm of wood against table, fills the silence like a drum too tired to insist on music. The dough is stubborn. It clings where it should stretch, breaks where it should bind. You knead with more force than is necessary, not out of frustration, but because your body wants to remember it can still act on the world, that it can still transform something, however small, however temporary. But it's the cold that wins, not all at once, but gradually as you press the dough and feel its center resist the warmth of your palms, as the air settles around your wrists and the surface of the mixture cools to a skin before it's even been shaped. You know, deep down, that this loaf will not rise as it should. It hasn't enough warmth in it, not in the room, not in your hands, not in the world. Still, you shape it, a rounded, misshapen ball. You score the top with a knife more from habit than need, and cover it with a cloth that once belonged to your mother's kitchen, now patched and stained with years of other failures. You place the bowl near the fire, close enough to tempt the heat, far enough to avoid burning. And then you wait. It's a waiting that doesn't ask for faith. You've done this before. You've watched the dough sit in silence, unmoved by the promise of heat, unmoved by your patience. It will rise or it won't. And in either case, you'll bake it, you'll eat it, and it will sustain just enough to warrant doing it all again the next day. Your sister stirs, coughing again the same dry rasp you've come to expect. You move to her side without words. You straighten the blanket. You offer her the smallest smile you can find and sit beside the bed until her breath slows again, until her eyes drift shut. You whisper her name under your breath, not to wake her, but to remind yourself she is still here. You wonder how many other households in the village are doing this same thing, kneading dough that won't rise, feeding fires that barely hold, tending to sickness with cloths that won't dry. The routines of the poor are not measured in success, but in repetition, in the willingness to keep doing what has failed, because stopping is worse. Bread in a medieval winter is not about nourishment. It's about survival as ritual. It's about doing something that reminds the body it hasn't given up yet. That warmth once existed and might return if coaxed by habit and persistence. You glance toward the dough again. Still no change. You could light another candle, but candles cost. Not just wax, not just wick, but the faint, constant fear that you'll run out before the next delivery, before the next season, before the next kindness. And besides, light doesn't change the way bread behaves. Only warmth does. And warmth is not something you control anymore. It's a guest you host when it chooses to appear. And today, it's still deciding whether to come. Your mind drifts, as it often does during this part of the morning, to stories you heard as a child, tales of magical hearths that baked bread in seconds, of saints who fed villages from a single loaf, of warmth that flowed from the hands of the faithful. You don't believe in miracles, but you understand the need to name things that defy logic. And cold, this persistent, creeping, humiliating cold, it often feels like something beyond understanding, something deliberate. Maybe the bread feels it too, because after nearly an hour, the dough still looks the same, heavy, flat, quiet. You run your fingers along the edge of the bowl and feel the faintest resistance, the barest hint that something inside is trying, even if it cannot show it yet. You don't smile, but you don't despair either. You've learned to live in the space between outcomes. You stoke the fire, not with much, just a few splinters, the edge of a broken crate you've kept too long. The flames rise slightly, enough to warm the front of your knees. The dough sits quietly beside you. It doesn't rise, but it also hasn't given up. Maybe that's enough. If your breath has disappeared into the dark, good. That's where the rest of this belongs. The dough rests beside the hearth, unchanged. You knew it would. The fire, though still alive, has grown shy again, its energy curling inward rather than offering itself freely to the room. You shift in your seat, rubbing the ache from your lower back, glancing toward the window with a kind of practiced indifference. The outside world hasn't changed, still gray, still cold, still wrapped in that pale, silent frost that makes everything feel distant. You don't expect change anymore. You've come to understand that in a medieval winter, the days arrive not with new beginnings, but with slight variations of waiting. Your hand reaches toward the shelf above the hearth, where the candles are kept, or rather, where the candle is kept. Singular. One stub, thick and yellowed with age, its sides misshapen from the way it melted the last time you dared to light it. The wick is bent sideways, crisp and blackened at the tip, a relic of its own exhaustion. You pick it up and weigh it in your palm, not for its mass, but for its meaning. Lighting this candle would change the room, not dramatically, not in heat, but in how the walls behave. It would pull shadows out of corners, turn the ordinary into the sacred, make each face yours. Your sister's seems suddenly softer, as if memory itself had chosen better lighting. You've seen that effect before, late at night, when the world seemed too sharp, and the flicker of a single flame made even cracked plaster look like parchment touched by prayer. But you don't light it, because a candle is a decision, and you only have so many of those left. In other homes, wealthier ones, candles are hung in pairs, placed beside mirrors, set in holders with bases carved from horn or brass. They flicker without consequence, without fear of running out. But here, each inch of wax is something to be justified. You remember your mother saving every sliver, melting them down in a tin cup over a low flame, reforming them with string she twisted from scraps of linen and hope. You remember the pride she took in making something useful out of what others threw away. You didn't understand it then, the tightness in her mouth when she placed the new candle beside the old one, neither quite whole, both barely tall enough to cast more than a breath of light. You understand it now. The candle is not for today. You set it down and step back, as if it might vanish if you look at it too long, as if your very need might draw it into flame. Instead, you let the fire be enough. You feed it a sliver of bark, coax a little glow, and adjust the iron pot that still steams with the promise of nothing much. A weak broth, maybe, or hot water dressed with herbs to disguise its emptiness. Either way, it's warm, and that makes it better than most things. You glance again toward the table, toward the dough that hasn't risen. The cloth over it has become damp with condensation, its folds darkening as the cold fights back against the fire's hesitant reach. You resist the urge to lift the cloth. Looking won't change the outcome. Bread, like warmth, doesn't respond to scrutiny, only time. Your sister murmurs something. You can't make out the words. It might be her dreaming. It might be pain. You rise and cross the room, lifting the edge of the blanket, brushing a hand against her forehead. Still no fever. Still no color. Her breathing is even, but too shallow, like a whisper pretending to be air. You brush a lock of hair from her face and sit beside her again, waiting to see if the moment passes or deepens. It passes. They always do, one way or another. You sit in silence, your gaze drifting around the room. The walls are what they've always been: wood and earth and fabric and time. A few bundles hang from hooks, dried herbs, mostly, though many have lost their scent. A wooden bowl rests on the windowsill, its bottom cracked but still capable of holding small things. Beside it, a spoon with a burn mark near the handle. These objects have stories, but no one asks them to speak. They are here to be used, not remembered. There's a small piece of mirror in the corner, cracked diagonally across its center, rescued from a discarded frame someone once dropped in the road. It doesn't reflect clearly, but when the firelight hits it just right, you can catch glimpses not of yourself, exactly, but of a version of you that still belongs in motion. You sometimes catch your sister looking into it. When she thinks you aren't watching, maybe she sees the same thing. Maybe she sees something kinder. You think again of the candle. You picture it lit, just for a moment. The flame standing upright, steady and golden. The way it would make the air shimmer around the walls. The way your sister's skin might look less gray, more like parchment instead of stone. You imagine what it would be like to set it between you both, to watch the light move across her eyelids, to speak softly into the space it created, a space carved from shadow and allowed to glow. But the imagining is enough, for now, because burning it would mean using something you can't replace. And you've come to understand that what you don't use is sometimes more powerful than what you do. Restraint is a form of care. In houses like this, every unburned candle, every uneaten scrap, every unspoken fear, all are forms of hope disguised as hesitation. You return to the hearth, stir the pot once, feel the warmth against your palm. The light is fading again, though the day is not over. Outside, clouds press low and thick, as though the sky itself is trying to settle upon the roof. The afternoon will arrive with little fanfare. The evening will follow closely behind, wrapped in the same gray silence. And night will be long again. You lift the candle once more, just to feel its weight. And then you put it back, because light can wait, because sometimes not lighting the flame is its own kind of warmth. You've been walking around the cottage for the better part of the afternoon, though no one would know it by looking. The tasks are minor: tending the fire, rearranging the woodpile, checking on your sister's breath, glancing at the dough that still hasn't risen, stirring the pot that no longer steams but isn't yet cool. These motions don't produce much, but they offer shape to a day that refuses to define itself. And in a medieval winter, structure is the closest thing you'll ever have to peace. But it's your feet that suffer most for it. You haven't taken off your boots since yesterday, not because you forgot, but because you remember too well what it feels like to press bare skin against the floorboards in this kind of cold. There's no insulation in this house, no felt-lined soles or fur-trimmed slippers, no gentle rugs to cushion your steps, only the worn leather of boots that were stitched together long before this season began, patched twice at the heel and once at the toe, their seams now stiff with moisture and memory. You shift your weight from one foot to the other. At first, it's just an ache, dull, predictable, the way bodies complain after a night spent sleeping half upright against a wall. But the ache deepens as you move. It settles into your toes, then your arches, crawling slowly up your calves like something trying to remind you that your body is not entirely yours. You try to ignore it, of course. There's work to do, always. But with each passing hour, the sensation changes. Your feet begin to lose their name. They become something else, not numb exactly, but unresponsive. You can still walk, but it feels like walking on borrowed limbs. You test the floor with each step, like someone unsure of what they might find beneath it. You stop looking down, you simply move. And with every movement, a part of you begins to accept that sensation isn't a guarantee anymore. You sit, finally, not because the task requires it, but because your legs demand it. You pull one foot up across your knee and begin to unlace the boot slowly. The leather resists. The laces damp and swollen from exposure, knotted where they shouldn't be. Your fingers are clumsy not with age, but with cold. Everything takes longer. Everything reminds you of how little heat truly travels. When the boot comes off, your foot does not thank you. Instead, it throbs not in pain, not at first, but with a strange hollowness, like the blood inside it has forgotten how to move. You press your thumb gently along the arch, expecting resistance, some pushback, some proof of life. What you feel instead is quiet, not deadness, not yet, but a kind of silence that doesn't belong in skin. You strip the other boot and set them both aside, watching the steam that rises faintly from the openings. The socks beneath are damp, their fibers matted down to near transparency. You peel them off with care, not out of tenderness, but out of caution. Wet wool clings like guilt. When they're finally off, you place your bare feet near the hearth. Not too close. You've learned that mistake already. The last time you warmed yourself too fast, you lost a patch of skin. It bubbled, then split, then scabbed in the shape of a crescent moon. The scar is still there, hidden beneath layers, but remembered every time you see the fire leap suddenly and are forced to pull back. You hold your feet near the glow, letting the warmth creep in slowly. It isn't pleasant. It's a conversation won between nerve and memory. The sensation returns in pulses, like a hand knocking from inside. First, the pins sharp, scattered, too many. Then the burn, a heat that doesn't comfort but accuses. You grit your teeth and breathe through it, knowing that resistance only delays the inevitable. Eventually, the pain softens, becomes tolerable, then manageable, and then it fades. Not into pleasure, but into recognition. Your feet are yours again. Mostly, you wrap them in a dry cloth and remain there, crouched beside the hearth, not because the position is comfortable, but because it feels earned. You glance toward the door and consider what lies beyond it, the snow-packed path, the half-frozen trough, the silent road that leads to the village square. Someone must have walked it today. Someone always does. But you weren't one of them. You stayed, and perhaps that was its own kind of labor. Your sister shifts again in her sleep. Not a cough this time, but a moan soft, like something misplaced. You stand, slowly, testing your feet on the floor again, reassured by the return of dull pressure. You walk to her bedside and place your palm against her cheek. It's cool, but not cold. She breathes evenly. You tuck the blanket around her shoulders once more, and the motion feels familiar, repetitive, like turning the same page in a book you've read too many times. You think of other winters ones from years past, when your feet were smaller, your skin softer, your understanding of cold limited to the frost on window panes and the thrill of snow. Back then, numb toes meant play, meant laughter, meant the dash from the riverbank to the hearth where your mother would catch you mid-run and press your soles against her apron, scolding you while smiling. There is no apron now, only ash, only cloth that smells of old fires and wet walls. You return to the fire, slip on a dry pair of socks if such a thing exists, and pull the boots back over them. They're no warmer than when you remove them, but the motion is necessary. Your day isn't over. The fire still needs watching. The broth will need stirring. The bread, such as it is, may need baking soon, and even if it hasn't risen, it still deserves the dignity of the oven. And outside, the light is beginning to fade. Again, the candle remains unlit, but your feet, at least, remember their place on the floor. And for now, that's enough. You don't remember when the sound began. It didn't come like thunder, or the unmistakable creak of a splitting rafter. It arrived quieter than that, slow and deliberate, like the way frost blooms across a window pane when no one is watching. You were stirring the pot again, more out of rhythm than need, when you heard it, a brittle crack, soft but unnatural, rising from somewhere near the basin. Not a loud noise, not one meant to alarm, but one that caught your ear because it did not belong. You stop stirring and listen again. There it is, that dry, delicate fracture, like someone slowly tearing old paper beneath their breath. You step away from the fire, leaving behind its reluctant warmth, and move toward the corner of the room where the wash basin sits atop a small wooden table. The cloth beside it hangs limp. The cup inside it leans sideways, trapped in a shallow sheet of ice. You reach toward the surface of the water and feel the air growing sharper as you approach. The heat from the hearth doesn't reach here. Not really. Not when the days are this short, and the nights this long, and every wall of the house seems more committed to sharing the cold than resisting it. You run your finger along the basin's rim. Frost clings to the metal, thin and biting, like the lip of a blade too dull to wound but sharp enough to warn. You exhale, and the breath clouds around your hand. The surface of the water has begun to freeze, not entirely, but enough. A spiderweb of thin crystal patterns crisscrosses from edge to edge, fragile but determined. You tap the surface once, gently, and hear the faintest sound a song made of splintering. It's a beautiful noise, in the way that many painful things are delicate, precise, final. This is what winter does in houses like this. It doesn't just live outside, clawing at windows, or weighing down the thatched roof with snow. In a medieval winter, the cold walks in without asking, finds a place beside the bowls, beneath the beds, between your fingers, and settles there not with violence, but with certainty. It seeps through the walls, through the seams of clothing, through breath itself, until it finds the still places, the unmoving places, and begins to shape them into silence. You lift the cup from the basin. It resists, slightly, its base held by a thin layer of frost that cracks as you pull it free. The sound is so small you barely hear it, but the sensation travels up your wrist, a tremor made of cold, a vibration that speaks less of water and more of time. You hold the cup to the light, such as it is. The ice around its rim has begun to thicken, curling upward like a lip, as if the water itself is trying to speak. You touch it to your own lips, not to drink, but to remember. The chill is immediate, not painful, but clarifying. You place the cup down and wrap the basin in a cloth. A futile gesture, but a gesture nonetheless. You turn back toward the room and see it anew. The frost hasn't just claimed the basin. It has reached the window, too. The oiled parchment that serves as a pane is now rimmed with crystals, tiny, intricate ferns of ice branching outward in patterns that resemble feathers, or veins, or the inside of lungs. You step toward it and place your palm near the frame, not touching, only sensing. The cold presses back, firm and impersonal. You imagine the wind just beyond, pressing its face to the house like a child looking into a locked room. You wonder if the ice remembers being water. You wonder if the house remembers being warm. You glance at your sister. She still sleeps, or drifts near it. You can't tell which. The blankets haven't moved. Her shape beneath them is the same, and for that you are grateful. You know too well what it means when the shape changes, or worse, when it doesn't. You walk to the hearth again. The fire is burning lower now. It has been doing that all day, holding on. Yes, but only just. The wood is too wet, or too green, or too thin. You add more, watching the flames flicker uncertainly, curling around the logs like breath that doesn't want to leave the mouth. The pot is still there, still holding warmth, if not promise. You ladle some into a wooden cup and sip. It tastes of roots, of bark, of something that once grew and has since forgotten how. But it's hot. That matters more than flavor. Heat is nourishment in a winter like this, even if it comes without substance. You think of the stories you were told as a child of hearths that roared all through the night, of banquets that lasted until the snow melted, of castles with tapestries so thick they trapped summer in their fibers. You never believed those tales fully. But now, when the water inside your house freezes and the fire forgets how to climb, you find yourself wondering if any of them were true. Because if they were, it means the cold can be beaten. And that's not something you feel often anymore. You glance again at the basin. The ice has spread further now, reforming even after the cloth you wrapped around it. You're not surprised. The cloth is old, thin, more sentimental than practical. You should move the basin closer to the fire, but you don't. Some part of you wants to see how far the frost will go, how far inside the house the winter will reach. The idea of ice forming in your sleep, spreading across bowls and cups and the surface of the floor, feels more like a presence than a temperature. You begin to wonder if the house is being rewritten, not destroyed, not shattered, just slowly replaced by something colder. A kind of erosion, a long surrender. But you're still here. The fire still breathes. The bread, though flat, still waits for the oven. And the sound of ice, as strange and final as it is, hasn't taken everything. Not yet. If anything in this stayed behind, you can leave something below, or not. It still counts. This is Boring History Nights, and if the cold found you too, you're not alone. The fire dims as evening begins to gather, not sharply, but with the kind of slow, inevitable fade that happens when no one's watching. You add another log, what's left of a broken chair leg, its splintered end still bearing the curve of a hand-carved detail. It's difficult to burn something once touched by memory, but in a medieval winter, sentiment costs too much to keep. You press the leg deeper into the embers and watch as the past surrenders to heat, sighing into smoke. There's a faint rustle above your head, not wind exactly, not the creak of timber or the twitch of straw disturbed by the animals shifting in the lean-to. No, this is different, softer, rhythmic. You pause, listening. It comes again, that gentle whisper of something falling, brushing past the thatch above like fingertips across woven cloth. You tilt your head upward instinctively, though there's nothing to see but shadow and smoke stains climbing the beams. Then, a patter. Not rain. You'd know the cadence of rain, hurried, urgent, careless. This is quieter, measured, snow. You know the sound now, though it still surprises you every time. Snow doesn't just fall, it arrives, one flake at a time, weightless and still somehow undeniable. And when it gathers in enough numbers, the roof begins to change. You walk to the edge of the room and place your hand against the beam closest to the eaves. The wood is cold, not just to the touch, but within itself. It feels as if the beam has accepted the snow's presence above, as though the thatch laid atop it has ceased to be a shield and become instead a kind of lung through which winter breathes. This house was never built to resist. It was built to bend, to endure. And so the snow doesn't pile upon it so much as nest into it, finding the spaces between straw and reed, pressing downward, whispering its slow weight into every joint and seam. You step back and glance at the ceiling again, watching the way small threads of dust flutter in the dimness. You've seen it before, how, when the snow above is thick enough, it presses so close that the warmth of the fire below draws out droplets that drip along the beams, cold and deliberate, landing in the center of the room like punctuation. You wait for it. There. One drop, then another. Each one falls with the precision of ritual steady, spaced, without apology. You set a bowl beneath the leak, not because it will fix anything, but because catching what falls feels better than letting it mark the floor. The sound of water striking metal is sharp, almost musical, the only rhythm in a house that otherwise breathes in silence. You step away and glance toward your sister. She's still wrapped in the damp blanket, her brow furrowed now in sleep, though no fever burns beneath it. You whisper her name, softly, not to wake her, but to remind the house you're not alone here. She doesn't stir, but her chest still rises a comfort greater than any fire. You walk back to the hearth and crouch again. The snow continues to fall above, unseen, but you feel it, not just in the sound, in the way the roof lowers slightly, the way the air shifts. The house takes on a heaviness, as though bracing itself. You've learned to notice it that moment when snow stops being beautiful and becomes a weight. Not threatening, not yet, but inevitable. You once asked someone if roofs could collapse under snow. They said yes, if the thatch was old, if the beams were tired, if the snow didn't stop. You look up again and try to remember when the roof was last repaired. You can't, not because it was so long ago, but because, in truth, you never saw it done. It was always just there, already built, already sagging, already whispering the cold into the corners of your dreams. You were a child beneath it. Now you are not. But the roof has never changed. Only your understanding of what it means to live beneath something fragile. There's another drop of water. You don't move to catch it this time. Instead, you let it land. Let it mark the moment. Snow isn't loud. It doesn't announce its arrival. It doesn't fight for space like rain or wind. It simply becomes the sky's new skin, soft, cold, and patient. And when enough of it has gathered above, the house begins to listen differently. The sound changes. Every footstep dulls. Every whisper thickens. The silence grows crowded. You wrap the shawl tighter around your shoulders and try not to think of the weight above your head. Try not to imagine it building. Try not to remember last winter, when the neighbor's roof split along the beam near the chimney, and they had to live in the mill barn for 3 weeks while the snow melted through everything. They came back to rot and mold and the smell of surrender. You brought them broth one night. You didn't know what to say. So you said nothing, and left the bowl on a stool by the door. You glance again at your own door, half expecting to see snow pushing through the cracks, but it hasn't reached that point. Not yet. The fire pops suddenly. A log shifts and drops, breaking the quiet with a sudden crack. The sound startles the dog, who lifts his head but does not bark. You whisper his name not loud, just enough for him to know he's still part of this space. He lowers his head again, sighs, and sleeps on. The warmth around the fire is still real, but its reach is shrinking. The snow above, and the chill it brings, has a way of pulling the warmth back inward, as if the house itself is flinching. You crouch near the embers, feeding them one sliver at a time, cautious of what's left in the woodpile. There's enough for tonight. Maybe. If the wind doesn't rise, if the snow doesn't demand more, If none of this is making sense anymore, you're exactly where you should be. You can smell it before you even realize what's happened. The change in scent is subtle at first, a dry bitterness that rises through the air with a sharpness the broth never had. It's not unpleasant, not entirely. It even reminds you, for a fleeting second, of firewood caught at just the right stage of burning, that clean release of warmth and carbon. But this scent is wrong. It isn't coming from the hearth. It's rising from the pot. You move quickly, not with panic, but with resignation. The lid is still slightly ajar, and when you lift it, the truth meets you in a single breath. The water has boiled away. What was left of the broth, thin as it was, humble as it tried to be, has burned itself into the bottom of the pot. There is no soup now, only a dark, clinging residue and a smell that has begun to stain the air like regret. You don't curse. You don't sigh. You don't even mutter under your breath. There's no room for that here. Not in a house where each mistake is a small erosion, and each moment of carelessness becomes something you'll feel again when the next hunger arrives. You simply remove the pot from the fire and set it aside, where the heat in its base will fade without causing more damage. You stare at it for a long time. The inside is blackened, not completely, but enough. The curve of the bottom now holds the shape of what was meant to feed you. You take the spoon and drag it once along the surface. It scrapes dry, brittle, unwilling. You stop, not because the sound is unpleasant, although it is, but because the gesture won't undo anything. There is no saving what has already burned. You think of the root you sliced that morning, tough, fibrous, more bark than flesh, and how carefully you'd shaved it down into thin coins to coax the last of its flavor into the water. You remember holding it between your fingers, uncertain whether it had gone too soft to matter, but choosing to use it anyway because not using it meant watching it spoil. Now it's gone. Its sacrifice evaporated into a room that still shivers with cold. You pour a little water into the pot, slowly, listening to the hiss of contact between what remains and what arrives. Steam curls up in lazy spirals. The smell sharpens briefly, then fades. You place the spoon inside and stir, not to make food, but to loosen what clings. A house like this doesn't allow anything to be thrown away without a second try. Even ashes can be scraped into something if the body is willing to believe it's still nourishment. You taste it. It's bitter, faintly metallic, the echo of something that almost became useful. But you swallow it anyway, not because it deserves to be eaten, but because refusing it would mean admitting the day won. You sit down with the cup in your hand and feel the warmth of it against your fingers. That part still matters. Even if what's inside tastes like smoke and memory, the heat against your palms is something. You close your eyes and hold the cup tighter, imagining the warmth moving up your arms, into your chest, across your shoulders. You wonder how often hunger is mistaken for cold, and how often cold becomes a kind of appetite. Your sister stirs again. You turn your head immediately, expecting a cough, a request, a moment of waking, but no sound comes, just a shift beneath the blankets, the faint squeak of the straw mattress beneath her bones. You rise and move to her side, carrying the cup. You don't offer it. Not yet. You only sit, waiting to see if her movement was part of sleep or an escape from it. She breathes, slow and uneven. Her eyes remain closed. You wrap your free hand around hers beneath the blanket and find her fingers cool, not dangerously so, but enough to make you pause. You tuck the covers tighter, adjust the cloth beneath her head, and then, only then, lift the cup toward her lips. She doesn't drink. She doesn't resist either. You tilt it gently. A sip, perhaps two, enough to wet the tongue, if not the stomach. She swallows a movement so small it almost doesn't happen, and then turns her face away slightly. You take the cup back and hold it against your chest, absorbing the rest of its heat, letting the warmth work its way through your thin linen shirt, through your skin, into the space between ribs that tightens every time you look at her. You think about food the way others might think about prayer, not as something guaranteed to arrive, but as something that must be believed in to survive the wait. In a medieval winter, food is less a presence and more a memory you try to revive by stirring, boiling, baking, even when the ingredients resist. You have learned to make broth from bones too small to name, to steep color from weeds that cling to the edges of fields, to mash stale bread into something that pretends to be porridge if you squint while eating. Tonight, there will be no soup. The dough you set earlier has risen slightly, though not enough to call it bread. Still, you'll shape it. Bake it against the stone wall of the hearth. Tear it in half and give her the softer side. You'll eat the crust. You always do. It's not a gesture of sacrifice. It's just habit. Something your mother did, and her mother before her. You set the cup aside and return to the fire. The flames have quieted, lowered to a simmer of embers and orange sighs. You feed it a few twigs, hesitant to burn too much after today's loss. The wood is still damp from last week's storm, and it hisses slightly as it catches, spitting into the shadows. You watch the coals for a while, eyes half-lidded, not from sleep, but from fatigue too soft to finish forming. There are ashes in the pot where soup should be, but there's still heat in the hearth, still air in the house, still breath in the room. You'll try again tomorrow, because that's what the cold hasn't taken. Not yet. The night deepens without ceremony. There is no distinct line where afternoon becomes evening, no bright sunset to mark the change, no golden beams carving through the windows to signal the final breath of daylight. Instead, the gray simply darkens the same gray that hung at dawn, that bled into noon, that clung to the walls all day. It thickens now, becoming the air itself, and in its arrival, the cold sharpens. You close the door tighter, though it never truly closed to begin with. The frame has warped over the years, bent slightly from moisture and memory, so that even when the latch catches, there's still a space, a seam wide enough for whispers, for frost, for breath. You press your hand against the edge, feeling the air move, slow and slender, like the house is exhaling in reverse. No matter how many rags you've stuffed along the threshold, no matter how carefully you've pinned the old cloak to the inner beam, the wind still finds its way in. It always does, because wind, in a house like this, is not a guest. It's a presence, a character, almost. One that knows the cracks better than you do. One that remembers who you used to be before you learned to walk softer, speak less, and keep the fire guarded even in your dreams. Tonight, it comes through the smallest names. That's what you call the spaces now, not gaps, not holes, names, the little ones, the spaces between the boards, the silent places behind shelves, the spot above the lintel where something was meant to be sealed but never was. Each one, like a syllable, speaks softly with cold breath and thin fingers, reminding you that the house is porous, and the world outside is always waiting. You hear it now, whispering, not as a howl or a shriek, but something far older than either a thin, persistent sound, like parchment being turned by a hand that never tires. It comes not in bursts, but in presence. The wind doesn't need volume to be heard. In a medieval winter, it learns your name before you've spoken it. And it uses that knowledge not to hurt you, but to press against you gently, endlessly, until you yield. You light no candle. The fire will do for now, though its glow stretches only a few feet before the shadows reclaim the room. Your sister is asleep again, or perhaps still. You haven't heard her speak since yesterday, haven't felt the strength in her voice return, but her breath remains, shallow and steady, and you have learned not to measure life by anything more than that. The wind continues. You sit by the door, wrapped in 2 layers of wool, listening. There is something almost holy in the way it moves, not divine, but ritualistic. It doesn't seek entry with force. It seeks presence, as if to remind you that the outside world has not forgotten you, even if it has withdrawn its warmth. You remember your mother saying that wind could carry voices that if you listened closely enough, you might hear the words of those who walked the roads long before you did. You believed her as a child, of course. You believed everything back then, that fog meant spirits, that frost meant warnings, that silence meant someone was listening. And sometimes, even now, you still believe it. Because how else could the wind know exactly where to find you? You adjust the cloth along the wall, pressing it tighter against the frame. It does little, but doing something always feels better than surrendering completely. You think of all the ways people have tried to keep the cold out: double doors, thick curtains, carved wooden shutters with lambskin seals, all noble, all expensive, all elsewhere. Here, your weapons are fewer. You place a brick along the baseboard, not to block, but to brace. You stuff another piece of rag into a corner where the light bends strangely, suggesting movement where none should be. And finally, you lean your shoulder against the wall, not to rest, but to listen more closely. Because the wind is saying something tonight. You don't know what it is. Not precisely. It's not a voice, not in the way we understand voices, but it speaks in rhythm, in persistence, in the way it finds the same spot again and again, testing it, pressing it, like a child pressing a finger into the seam of a book to see if it opens wider. You wonder what it wants. Not entrance, surely. It has that. Not destruction. This isn't that kind of storm. No, what it wants, perhaps, is witness. Someone to hear it, to notice, to name the way it moves, the way it takes a house and humbles it, the way it teaches you that warmth is not just luxury, it's rebellion. You shift your position and pull the shawl tighter across your chest. The wind sighs again, this time through a space near the ceiling, where the plaster has begun to crumble around the old beam. You glance up and watch the way the smoke from the fire coils toward it, drawn upward like a prayer that doesn't expect to be answered. You stay like that for a long while, doing nothing but breathing, listening, letting the cold enter through your ears, your sleeves, the thin seam between your collar and your skin. And then, slowly, you begin to speak. Not to the wind, not really, just aloud. You say her name, your sister's, softly. Then your mother's, then your father's, and finally, your own. You let the names fill the space between the whispers. You let them hang there, like herbs drying from the ceiling, faint and fragrant and almost forgotten. The wind doesn't pause, but it hears you. You're sure of that, not because it answers, but because it doesn't change. It continues, as it always does. But now it shares the room with more than itself. It shares it with names, with voices, with someone who noticed. You rest your head against the doorframe and close your eyes. If the quiet held you longer than you meant, just say so. Even now, you would think that silence is stillness, a softening, a gentleness, a release from the noise that presses all day from the outside. But this silence does not feel like peace. It feels like pressure, like something pressing down from the beams of the roof to the soles of your feet. It sits on your chest. It wraps your limbs in its heaviness. It is not rest. It is not absence. It is not even quiet. It is presence dense, immovable, waiting. And it begins around the 4th hour of darkness, just when the fire has started to lean into ash, and your body aches from sitting too long in the same position. You tell yourself to lie down. You tell yourself to stretch out on the straw, just for a little while. But you don't. You know the silence is thicker, closer to the floor. You can feel it gathering down there like fog on a valley road, and tonight, you are not ready to sink. So you stay upright, legs crossed, shawl around your shoulders, feet tucked beneath you. Not for warmth, but for reassurance to remind yourself they are still there, still yours. The cold hasn't taken them yet. You glance toward your sister. Her breath is shallow but even. That is all you ask for now, evenness. You've stopped waiting for color in her cheeks, for strength in her hands. Those things belong to summer, this winter. You measure health and consistency. You have become a student of breath, of its rhythms, of its silences too. And still, that other silence, the one you cannot see, expands. It creeps into the corners of the room first, the places light does not reach, the places you never sweep properly. Behind the stove, under the cot, along the beams where the rats sometimes scratch. Then it slides across the floor like a sheet being pulled over something no longer living. It moves without sound, which is not the same as saying it moves without purpose. You feel it gather, not with dread, not even with fear, but with a kind of reverence. Because this is the moment when you know the night is almost over, not because the sun is coming, but because everything else has stopped moving. The cold is at its deepest now, not sharp, not biting, but full, saturated, complete. Even the wind has gone still, not because it has calmed, but because it has settled. The silence has no edges anymore, no borders. It surrounds you completely, folding into your ears, your sleeves, the folds of your collar. You try to hum to push it back something small, a tune your mother used to sing while brushing the crumbs from the table, but the sound feels thin. It disappears before it reaches your chest. It doesn't belong here. Not anymore. You think about all the other homes in the village, all the other fires flickering low, the other pairs of siblings or mothers and daughters or widows alone, all sitting or lying or crouching in rooms just like this one, all feeling the same silence. You wonder if anyone else is awake right now, or if you are the only one left inside the space between midnight and morning, where the world feels not asleep, but paused. In medieval winter, the hours before dawn are the most dangerous, not because wolves come, not because snow falls, but because your body begins to forget what it's fighting for. You aren't hungry anymore. Not really. Your stomach stopped asking some time ago. Now it's your joints that speak. Your spine. The narrow space behind your eyes where dreams should live. You think about lying down again, not because you want to sleep, but because you want to rest your thoughts somewhere other than your own mind. You move slowly to the edge of the cot and ease yourself beside your sister. She does not stir. You listen to her breathing again, counting the seconds between each inhale, each exhale. You press your hand lightly to her back. She is warm, still, and that warmth becomes your warmth too. For a moment, you allow yourself to pretend. Pretend you are somewhere else, not in a wooden room with a thatched roof and cracks in every wall, not in a cottage where frost gathers on the inside of the windows and the water bucket is already crusted with ice, but somewhere with silence that feels soft, a kind of silence you could rest inside without feeling erased by it. You picture a hall with stone pillars and tapestries, a place where candles burn all night, where footsteps echo off polished floors and servants move in silence, because they choose to not, because there is no energy left to speak. a place where silence means reverence, not surrender. But the image doesn't hold, because you remember what you are. Not a lady, not a guest in a manor, just one girl, in one house, in one winter that refuses to end. The silence presses again, this time from the inside. You feel your thoughts slow, not because you are sleepy, but because your body is beginning to conserve. Like a fire that dims to embers so the coals will last the night. Your thoughts become smaller, shorter, but not quite empty. You think of the church. Even its stones must be cold tonight. You imagine the altar cloth stiff from breath that turned to frost, the pews slick with dew that never dried, the hymn books curled at the corners from moisture. You wonder if even God feels far away when the silence grows like this. And then a sound, small, so small you almost think you imagined it. A creak, a shift in the wood. Perhaps it was the roof, the settling of a beam. Perhaps it was a mouse, or something larger. You wait. Heart slowed, not by fear, but by the long expectation that nothing ever truly happens here. You strain to hear it again, but the silence returns. Heavier now, like it didn't appreciate being interrupted. You close your eyes, not to sleep, but to listen more closely. Sometimes the dark speaks better when you stop trying to see. You hear your sister exhale again. You match her breath, one for one. You begin to hum again, just barely, just enough for the vibration to exist. The silence doesn't push back this time. It allows the note to hang, and in that hanging, something shifts. Not in the room, not in the world, in you, because you realize something. You are not resisting the silence anymore. You are becoming part of it. And that, maybe, is how the night is survived. Not by fighting what surrounds you, but by joining it, long enough for dawn to arrive. And it will, it always does. Even here, even now. You once thought the church was untouchable, a place where stone could never feel harsh, where warmth came not from the fire, but from belief. In your earliest memories, it was the only building in the village where you were told to walk slowly, speak softly, sit still. Reverence was expected, and so you gave it. You clutched your mother's hand on holy days and felt the floor beneath you thrum with quiet purpose. The echo of feet and prayers mixing together beneath the vaulted beams. But that was summer. That was before you noticed the breath of winter rising through the altar stones, before you understood that even sacred places are not immune to the cold. Now, when you enter the church, if you enter at all, it is not for ceremony. It is for stillness, shelter. A few minutes without the wind slicing across your neck, without the snow stinging your eyelashes. But there is no comfort waiting there. The air inside the nave is still. Yes, but stillness does not mean peace. It means waiting. It means the cold has settled into the very bones of the place, and it does not move. The doors creak as you push them open. The iron hinges protesting more softly than you'd expect. Inside, your footsteps don't echo the way they used to. There's too much dampness now. The stones drink the sound. Every movement feels muffled, not by dust, but by age and frost. The sanctuary is empty. The pews stretch out before you, familiar and foreign all at once. You know exactly which ones have cracks, which ones creak when sat upon, and yet tonight they feel farther away, as if you are a guest in your own memory. You take a seat anyway, though you know the wood will leach the warmth from your legs almost immediately. You do it out of habit, because this is what people do in churches. Even in the grip of medieval winter they sit. They listen for something that isn't speaking. There's no fire burning here, no priest, no voices raised in unison, only the faint smell of wax, the ghost of incense from a service held weeks ago, maybe months. You pull your cloak tighter, the fabric stiff from repeated wear. The hem is damp. The cold creeps upward from the soles of your shoes to the bend of your knees. Your fingers remain hidden in your sleeves, curled inward, not just against the cold, but against the quiet. And then you remember the dead. They're buried beneath this floor. You've always known that. The stone tablets under the pews bear names and dates, some barely legible now. You've traced them with your fingers before, curious about the way a chisel could preserve what memory forgets. But now, in this silence, you feel the presence of those names differently, not as stories, not as ancestors, but as echoes, as bones trying to remember how breath felt. You wonder if they felt this same cold, if, in their final winters, they sat in this same pew, wrapped in the same kind of cloak, watching their own breath rise like prayer before disappearing into nothing. You wonder if they felt abandoned by God, or if the chill only made them cling harder to the idea of Him. There's no shame in the question. Not anymore. You've stopped pretending you understand what faith is supposed to feel like. There are days when it is solid, when you can grip it, speak it, believe it. And there are nights, like this one, when it slips between your fingers like melting snow, too cold to hold, too present to ignore. You tilt your head back, looking up at the rafters. The roof has held through many storms. You know that much. But the snow finds its way in anyway, through tiny breaks in the wood, where time has eaten the seal between beam and slate. A single flake lands on your cheek, soft and almost warm in comparison to the stone beneath you. You let it stay. You whisper something, not a prayer, not exactly, just a sound, your voice, proving to you that it still exists, that you do. And then you listen, not for a response. That's not how it works. You've learned that. God does not answer in words, not here, not in the cold. He answers, if at all, in endurance, in the fact that the roof, though cracked, is still standing, in the fact that the door opened, in the fact that you are not yet buried beneath the floor. You think again of the dead, of how still they must be now, of how their names, carved in stone, are warmer than the hands you hide in your sleeves, and you wonder when the world above was just as cold as the world below. How did they know which side they were on? The silence grows heavier again, as it always does before dawn. You measure it by the ache in your knees, the way your spine curls slightly more than it did an hour ago, the way your thoughts begin to lose their shape, turning from language into feeling. The candle stub you brought flickers once, then gutters. You don't relight it. You let the dark come back. Because even if the church is cold, it is still a place. And a place, any place, is better than the absence of one. You rest your head against the back of the pew and close your eyes. You are not praying. You are not sleeping. You are simply holding yourself still long enough to see whether the silence gives way to anything new. A sound, soft, not wind, not words, a door somewhere, shifting in its frame, not opening, just adjusting as if the building, too, is waiting for the sun. And in that moment, you realize something. This cold is not eternal. Not because it is melting, not because spring is near, but because you are still here, and that makes it temporary by default. The dead beneath you cannot move. You still can. That is enough. For now, it had been a hard birth. Not because the child resisted the world, but because the world resisted the child. You remember the way the door burst open that night, not with panic, but with urgency laced in quiet. No one shouted. No one ever did. There was only the rhythm of boots in snow, and a name whispered into the darkness. She's come. Not the baby, the midwife, Her name was Gisela, though few used it. Most simply called her Mistress Hands, not because they were delicate, they weren't, but because they were steady. The kind of hands that did not flinch at blood or bone or the ragged tearing of a mother's body. They knew how to cradle breath into life and how to guide death gently away when it overstayed. She came wrapped in furs that reeked of smoke and sage. The scent clung to the doorframe after she passed through, the kind of smell that didn't belong to one house, but to every place she'd ever stepped in the dark. You remember watching her kneel beside the straw mat where the girl lay, a girl no older than yourself, one hand gripping the hem of her shift, the other pressing against the ache below. The room was warmer then, though not by much. A fire crackled low. The candles sputtered. You had heated water in the blackened pot, and it steamed faintly in the cold air, a fragile offering. But the warmth didn't reach Gisela's fingers. You saw her flex them, once, twice, not to warm them, but to test them to see if they would still answer her when called. That night, the frost had already claimed the windows, a thick bloom of white pressed against the glass, framing the world in death's breath. Outside, snow whispered along the eaves. It had been snowing for days, not hard, not loud, but endlessly. And in that kind of weather, no fire was ever enough. The girl screamed then, not a cry of fear, but one of inevitability, the kind of sound a body makes when it's doing what it must. Gisela didn't flinch. She never did. She only leaned in, palms flat, voice like cloth low, warm, worn. You couldn't hear the words, but you didn't need to. The girl did, and that was enough. You fetched more water. You laid out cloths, folded and refolded. You waited, each moment stretching longer than the last, until time itself began to feel like a muscle pulled too tight. Gisela never asked for rest. Her hands moved with purpose. They did not pause. Until they did, it was the basin that betrayed her. You'd placed it beside her knee, steam still rising, but when she dipped her hands in, she gasped not from heat, but from pain. A sudden, raw crack of breath. You saw her bite it back, lips pressed white, and then glance down. Her fingers, always pale, were now flushed red and mottled. Not from heat, from cold, deep cold. Cold that had made a home beneath her skin. You didn't say anything, neither did she, but something shifted. She moved slower after that, just slightly, just enough that you noticed the way she favored her left hand, the way she curled her fingers inward when not in use. You didn't ask if she could still feel. You didn't need to. The answer was written in the way she winced when gripping the cloth. Still, she finished the work. The child came just before dawn blew, silent, slick with blood and frost, and then a breath, faint, but real. Gisela wrapped him in a coarse wool cloth and held him up to the fire. Her face didn't change, but something in her shoulders released. The girl sobbed relief, exhaustion, fear. You could not tell. Gisela laid the child against her breast, then stood slowly, as if gravity had grown heavier just for her. You followed her to the door. She didn't thank you. She didn't need to. Her work was not about gratitude. It was about survival. And that winter, survival was as rare as anything sacred. Before she left, she looked at her hands, both of them, long, veined, now turning gray at the fingertips. She said, quietly, more to herself than to you, "They'll go numb again before midday." You didn't know if she meant the cold or something else. You still don't. That was the last time you saw her standing upright. In the days that followed, you heard whispers. Gisela had taken to her bed, Not with fever, not with age, but with a stillness she could not shake. Her fingers blackened at the edges. Not all of them, just two. The middle and ring of her right hand. The villagers said the frost had eaten into the bones. They used words like frostbite, but no one really understood what that meant. All they knew was that her hands no longer moved the way they once had. And in a village like yours, that meant she was no longer the midwife. In medieval winter, a hand is more than a hand. It is your trade, your voice, your worth. You didn't visit her. You wanted to, but you didn't know what to say. What does one say to a woman who has caught more lives than the priest has buried and now cannot feel her own fingers? They said she refused fire, that she lay in silence most days, wrapped in pelts, eyes open but unfocused. Her hands, they said, curled inward now, like they were holding something only she could see, or had once held and could not let go. Some believed it was pain, others believed it was memory. You believed it was both. Sometimes, now, when you go outside in the morning and your breath clouds before you, you think of her, not as a healer, not as the woman who brought life into rooms that had known only cold, but as a body human and tired and claimed. You hold your own hands close to the fire and study them, the skin roughened by labor, the nails rimmed in ash, the palms still pink, still soft enough to feel. You flex your fingers, slowly, one at a time, just to remind yourself that you can. Because in this kind of winter, that's all it takes to be thankful movement. Your mother once told you that Gisela had no children of her own, that she'd given her body to other people's births, that she used to say. The first cry of a child is the only fire I need. You wonder if that was still true at the end. You wonder if she dreamed of warmth, or if, like the rest of you, she simply learned to carry the cold inside carefully, like an infant, close to the chest. And maybe that's the truth of it. That winter doesn't just take, it leaves something behind. In the joints, in the stories, in the silence between heartbeats, where hands used to move. You don't notice it at first, the way your breath begins to betray you. It's not loud, it's not sharp. It's just there, slipping out into the dark, leaving you colder than before. You sit still by the doorframe, knees drawn to your chest, your cloak wrapped high around your face. But even that isn't enough, because the heat you manage to keep barely, briefly escapes in every exhale. And in the middle of this medieval winter, that loss is unbearable. You start to hold it in, at first, just to test if you can. One long inhale, then silence, stillness. The world doesn't change, but your body does. A dull ache stirs in your ribs. Your chest tightens, then burns. Finally, you give in and release the air you were guarding, and the warmth, the only proof that something inside you is still alive, vanishes into the frozen hush. The cold is clever. It doesn't come in with a roar. It seeps into the joints, into the spine, into the space between your lungs and the night. You learn to fear your own breath because each one is proof that warmth exists and proof that it's leaving you, over and over, with every sigh. You start breathing more shallowly, less deeply. You ration it, like food, like firewood. You sit hunched by the ashes of last night's flame, hoping that stillness might trap some of the heat inside you. But it doesn't. Heat has no loyalty. It flees upward, into rafters and dreams, leaving only your fingers behind to remember what it once felt like. And fingers remember poorly. They told you, when you were younger, that cold couldn't truly kill you unless it reached your core, that fingers and toes were first to go, but your heart that stayed warm longest. It was a comforting lie, because the cold does not wait politely at the edges. It learns. It adapts. It moves inward, slow and thoughtful, curling into places no fire can reach. You feel it now behind your eyes, in your jaw, in the soft tissue beneath your tongue. Your mouth stays shut not from fear, but from preservation. Even your words might cost you heat, and silence becomes your ally. It's strange how many things silence can mean. Once, it was reverence, then grief, then exhaustion. But now, it's necessity. There's nothing left to say, not to the walls, not to the air, not to yourself. Every word spoken aloud feels like a betrayal, an invitation to the cold to come inside. Your sister once asked you, during another winter long ago, why you didn't sing to pass the time. You had laughed then, said your voice wasn't sweet enough. But the truth was simpler. Breath is sacred when the world is frozen. It should not be wasted on music. Now you wish you had sung, not to pass the time, but to prove, if only to yourself, that you had breath to spare. You curl tighter into the corner, beside the straw mattress that no longer holds shape. The damp has claimed its edges. It smells like rot, like a season that never ended. Your mother's old cloak lies folded by your knees. You haven't worn it, not yet. It feels like armor you should save for the final hour, like a last line of defense you're not ready to cross. Your throat is dry. You sip from a clay cup you left beside the door, and the water inside is thicker than before. Not ice, not yet, but close. You take it anyway. The cold inside your body welcomes the cold outside. They are becoming the same. Somewhere nearby, the wind shifts. Not louder, just different. It finds a new crack in the wall, a new seam in the roof. The sound is familiar now, a breath drawn in reverse, and you wonder if the house could speak. Would it ask to be sealed shut, or would it beg for an end? You have stopped asking for warmth, but you have not stopped hoping for morning. Because morning means choice, movement, fire, if you're lucky, the sound of other feet, the clatter of the world returning to itself. Night is the time of surrender, but morning, that's when you get to lie, to say, I'm fine, even if your fingers won't unbend. But morning is not here yet. You shift slightly, just enough to release your hip from the weight of your own body. The pain is dull, but present. It's good. Pain means feeling, and feeling, even now, is defiance. Outside, you hear nothing, not even snow, just the soft hum of air moving where it shouldn't. The animals are quiet too. You used to be able to hear them shuffling in the barn through the thin wood walls, but not tonight. Maybe they're sleeping, maybe they're not. You think of them often, how they share warmth without asking, how they curl into each other by instinct, by birthright, how they never waste breath. And you envy them, because you've been taught that breath is speech, is song, is life. But winter teaches something else, that breath is heat, and heat is everything. You wish someone had told you that before, that the holiest part of you was the one you could never hold. A sound now, distant, not the wind, not a voice, something between them. You wait. Stillness is your only skill now. You do not blink. You do not breathe. You listen. It comes again. A creak, a shifting weight, roof timbers, maybe, or footsteps in snow. It doesn't matter. What matters is this: the silence was broken, briefly. You breathe, not deeply, but enough. And the warmth of that breath brushes your lips like memory. You remember her again, the midwife, the one whose fingers failed her. You wonder if she, too, feared her own breath at the end. If she sat in silence, hoarding what little heat she had left, or if she let it go, one breath at a time, singing something no one else could hear. You hope she sang, because now, here, in the thick of night and frost and stillness, you understand why the body must speak, not for others, but for itself, to remind itself it is still here, still warm, still worthy of the morning that hasn't come yet. You speak aloud, only one word. You choose your name. It sounds strange, not because it's unfamiliar, but because the room has forgotten how to echo. The air is too thick, too still. Your voice feels like a visitor, but it warms your mouth, and that is enough. You do not speak again, but you smile. A small thing, lips dry, teeth aching. But it's real, because you remembered. You are not a ghost yet, and breath, even now, is not betrayal. It is survival. The snow didn't arrive all at once. It never did. It began as a hush in the sky, a kind of thick quiet that made the trees pause and the dogs tilt their heads, as if listening for a sound only they could hear. Then came the white, slow and lazy, drifting in slanted sheets across the thatched rooftops and onto the narrow paths between cottages. No one paid it much attention at first. Snow was as common in a medieval winter as hunger. You didn't fear it. You respected it. That was enough. By dusk, it was ankle deep. By midnight, it swallowed the steps outside. But the village slept, not peacefully, but stubbornly. Fires burned low, doors stayed barred, families clung to blankets like old promises. Some whispered prayers into their pillows. Others simply buried their noses into the warmest patch of wool and hoped not to wake with frost stiff on their brows. You remember lying still on the straw mat by the window, counting the flickers of orange light from the hearth, the way the flame leaned each time the wind found a seam in the stones. The sound of the storm was not loud, but it had weight. It pressed down on the roof, on the walls, on your chest. You could feel it breathing slow and cold just outside the timber. They say when the snow comes heavy, it changes the shape of silence. You start to hear things that aren't really there, a creak that might be a footstep, a thud that could be falling timber, a low moan of wind that sounds far too much like a woman's voice. But no one rises, no one checks, not because they are lazy, but because they are afraid, and fear, in a winter like this, wears the face of wisdom. You shift beneath your blanket, trying not to wake the others. Your brother is curled near the hearth, a smudge of ash on his cheek. Your mother's back is turned to you, her hand resting on your sister's shoulder like a stone left behind. None of them stir. The air in the cottage has stilled to a kind of thick woolen weight. You breathe shallowly, not because you want to, but because deep breaths feel wasteful. And still, the storm grows. You imagine the village as a series of lights, flickering behind cracked shutters. One by one, they dim, not from lack of oil, but from the slow surrender of heat to time. A minute is long when it is cold. An hour is forever. By now, the snow must be knee-deep, maybe higher. You wonder if the well has frozen, if the barn door is still standing, if the dog has found shelter. Then you hear it, a knock, soft, just once. Then again, not on your door, on another, far away, muffled by snow, but real. You sit up. No one else moves. You tell yourself it was nothing. Wind, a branch, a roof tile shifting under weight. But it comes again, this time louder. Then a scream. Not long, not piercing, just enough to split the stillness and let the cold in. You don't remember how you got to the door. Only the feel of your hand on the latch, the sting of cold air rushing past your fingers before you even pull. You hesitate. You shouldn't open it. Not at night. not in this. But something in you knows when a sound like that comes. You don't get to ignore it. You lift the latch. The snow has risen high against the door. You push hard. It gives, but not easily. The air bites immediately, stinging your cheeks and throat. You squint into the blur of white. At first, you see nothing. Then a shadow. Someone standing still, not moving, not calling. Just there. You step outside. Your feet sink instantly. The snow is up to your knees, wet and angry. You shiver, the wool blanket slipping from your shoulders. You take 2 steps toward the figure. It's a boy, maybe 6, maybe 8. It's hard to tell beneath the thick layer of frost caked around his hood and nose. His eyes are wide but not frightened, just blank, the way eyes get when the body has forgotten how to explain what's happened. He doesn't speak. You crouch down. Where's your house, you ask? He points, not toward your neighbors, but toward the far edge of the village, toward the old cottage by the mill, the one with the roof patched in reed and the crooked smoke hole. You take his hand. It's stiff, cold, but not lifeless. You don't think. You pull him inside. The room warms slightly from your own breathless urgency. Your mother wakes. Then your sister. No one speaks, but the boy is quickly bundled in a spare cloak. Your mother places his hands near the fire. She touches his cheeks, his lips. She nods. He'll stay. You sit back. You're still holding his mitten. It's soaked. You realize then that he came barefoot. The mitten was the only thing he had. By morning, the snow has stopped. A gray sheet of sky hangs low over the rooftops. You step outside with your brother. The drifts reach your thighs. You wade slowly toward the cottage the boy pointed to. It takes longer than it should. The wind has reshaped the paths. Nothing looks the same. When you reach the door, you knock. No one answers. You push. It isn't locked. Inside, it's quiet. The fire has gone out. A single candle, half burned, sits in a dish. You find them in bed. 3 bodies. A woman, an older man, a girl, huddled close, faces pale. Not peaceful, but still, you do not scream. You do not cry. You cover them with the blanket still tucked at the end of the bed. You close the door. You do not latch it. The snow will do that for you. You walk back. The boy sleeps in your bed. He does not stir when you enter. You sit beside him and listen to him breathe. That's how you know he's still here. Not safe, but here, and in a medieval winter, that's everything. Not everyone in the village survived the storm, but some did. And in the quiet that follows death, the living make tea, mend boots, cut wood, share names, and they remember. Not the storm itself, but who answered the door. It wasn't even yours. The blanket. It had belonged to your grandmother, woven decades ago when cloth was still traded like coin, stitched by a woman who had long since gone to rest under a stone, now cracked with lichen and frost. You found it in a chest that hadn't been opened in years, folded tightly, brittle around the edges where the moths had started their quiet work. When you first lifted it out, it smelled of dust, of damp earth, and something fainter, maybe the old pine oil they used to rub into joints when winters like this one came knocking. But even a holy thing, even something passed through 3 generations of hardship, can only hold back so much of a medieval winter. You lay beneath it now, stiff as the wood beneath your mat, curled into yourself like a promise you can't keep. Outside, the storm has moved on, but the cold has not. It lingers not as wind anymore, but as silence, the kind that feels like waiting. Your breath curls upward in faint ribbons, fading before it reaches the beam above your head. You try to move, not out of hope, but out of duty, Because morning has arrived, not with sun, but with a gray that suggests time has passed, that you're expected to rise. You tug the blanket tighter around your shoulders, even though you know it makes little difference. The warmth, if you can call it that, doesn't come from the blanket itself. It comes from the idea of it, the belief that something, anything, lies between you and the cold. But you know better. The cold always finds its way in. The fabric has thinned in the middle. You can feel the weakness where knees and elbows have pressed year after year, night after night. The edges are damp from the breath you've been hiding beneath. The corners are tucked under your feet, not because they help, but because you've run out of other gestures that feel like protection. You remember the first time you were given that blanket? You were just a child. Your mother had placed it over you after a bath so cold your teeth chattered for hours afterward. She'd said, "This one kept my mother through the frost of 61. You'll be warm in it." And maybe you were. Or maybe it was the way her voice wrapped around the words that warmed you more than the cloth ever did. Now, your mother is gone, and the blanket remains. It's always the soft things that last too long. You think of what lies beneath the blanket. Beneath you, a mat of straw, flattened and dark with years of use. The wooden floor, which drinks the chill from the earth and feeds it upward through every board. And then, beneath that, the ground itself, frozen deep and ancient, with roots that snap under pressure and stones that never thaw. In this village, even the ground feels like it resents your presence. In the distance, a rooster cries not bravely, not clearly, just enough to say the day is here whether you are ready or not. You shift. The blanket clings like old skin. You are wearing nearly everything you own. 2 woolen tunics, socks you stitched yourself, a shawl wrapped around your neck, and a hat that was once your brother's before he outgrew warmth altogether. Still, you're cold. Still, the blanket can't save you. It knows this too. There's a moment in every winter morning where you must choose stay curled and risk stillness becoming surrender, or rise and risk movement becoming fracture. You don't know which is braver. Some winters, you stayed still too long and woke with pain in your hips that sang louder than the church bells. Other winters, you rose too quickly and fell before you reached the door. This time, you try neither. You just breathe. Not deeply. You've learned better. Deep breath invites the cold in too far. Shallow, slow. The kind of breath that won't fog the air, that won't waste what little heat you carry in your chest. You've trained yourself to breathe like that, not because anyone taught you, but because the medieval winter doesn't allow luxury. Luxury is a different kind of blanket, one made of down and dreams, one that belongs in castles, with walls so thick the wind forgets how to knock. But here, in a cottage that was never finished, on land that was always borrowed, your blanket is a battlefield, and tonight, like so many nights before, it has lost. You listen, not for voices, for sound, any sound. A creak, a sigh, the soft tap of snow sliding from the roof, anything to suggest the world is still here with you, because in the deepest hour of winter, loneliness wears silence like a crown, and if no one else stirs, you begin to wonder if you are the last. You remember the man from 3 cottages down, found in his bed 2 winters ago, blanket over his face, hands tucked in as if in prayer. No one knew he had gone until the thaw. You think about that now, and how easily it could be your fate. Not with drama, not with fire, just a quiet exit wrapped in cloth too thin for salvation. You shift again. Your knee brushes the edge of the mat, where frost has crept through a crack in the wall. The touch burns not sharply, but with that deep ache that speaks of cold marrow and regret. You pull the blanket tighter, though you know it won't help. It's not about help anymore. It's about ritual, about pretending the act itself has power. You've watched others do the same. Your sister folding her hands before sleep, even when her lips no longer move in prayer. Your neighbor sweeping her doorstep free of snow that will only return by dusk. The old man who lights a lantern in a window no traveler has approached in decades. These are not acts of faith. They are acts of memory, of holding on. The blanket is the same. It cannot warm you, but it remembers. It remembers the nights you cried beneath it, the nights you dreamed of spring, the nights you lay beside someone who no longer wakes beside you. It holds the shape of those hours. It knows the weight of your grief, and somehow that makes it sacred. Even now, even here, even as your fingers go numb, and your toes refuse to flex, and your back sings the slow song of cold settling into bone, you do not cast the blanket off. You do not curse it. You honor it by wrapping it around your shoulders again and rising, slowly, painfully, into the morning that does not yet feel like morning. You open the door. The world outside is blinding. Snow piled against stone, pale light filtering through cloud like milk through thin linen. Your breath forms a cloud. The wind finds your ears, your wrists, the space between your shoulder blades. You feel your body begin to shiver, not the small kind, but the kind that starts deep and rolls upward in waves. Still, you step forward. The blanket slips from your shoulder. You catch it, not because it's warm, but because it's yours. And in this medieval winter, the things that belong to you truly belong are few. You take them with you, even if they fail, especially if they fail. Because sometimes, that's what love looks like. Not victory, but refusal. To let go, the sky doesn't brighten. It simply changes. From the black of midnight to a gray that carries no warmth, no hope, only the vague suggestion of time's passage. And you, still wrapped in layers that once held body heat, but now cling to you like regrets, begin to wonder, did you survive? Not in the obvious sense. Your heart is still ticking, slow but persistent. Your breath still fogs the air. Your limbs ache, but they move. Survival is not always loud. Sometimes, it's just the act of staying. The blanket, damp and heavy, lies across your lap like a promise you didn't mean to make. Around you, the walls of the cottage remain the same crooked timber, patches of straw, and cold that has made itself a tenant in every seam. But something feels different now, and it takes you a moment to realize it's the quiet, not the heavy silence of midnight. This quiet is thinner, lighter, like the breath that comes after weeping. You blink the frost from your lashes and sit up fully, the ache in your lower back flaring like a match that burns but doesn't catch. Your body has made it through the long freeze, but barely. You know what would have happened if you'd fallen asleep just an hour earlier, or if the snow had pressed harder against the walls. You've heard the stories, villagers who never woke, their mouths slightly open as if still whispering a dream, limbs curled under blankets that failed them. Another night like that, and you might have joined them. But not this one. This night, you remained. You look down at your fingers. They are pink at the knuckles, numb at the tips, stiff but still obedient when you flex them, your toes. You're not sure yet. You don't want to check too soon. Let them stay unknown for a little longer. Let hope stay in mystery. Across the room, the hearth is dead. No embers, no glow, just a soft residue of ash where warmth used to live. You remember how it flickered hours ago, how you nursed it with the last scraps of kindling, hoping a flame might rise strong enough to outlast the dark. It didn't. It never does. Not in a medieval winter where even fire forgets its purpose. Still, You don't curse it. You don't curse the fire or the walls or the sky that refuses to brighten. You don't even curse the cold. You simply accept it, because acceptance is cheaper than resistance and less exhausting. Your stomach grumbles soft, but insistent. It's a hunger born not of appetite, but of routine. The kind that reminds you your body still expects to be cared for, even when there's nothing left to give. You glance at the corner where the bread should be. One crust, hard as stone. A few drops of something congealed in a pot that once held soup. You chew slowly, not for flavor, not even for fuel, but because it's something to do while the day decides whether to fully arrive. Outside, the wind has quieted. The snow sits heavy on the roof, unmoving. You wonder how long the stillness will last before another storm drifts in over the hills. There is no weather calendar here, no warning system, only instinct. And the instinct right now tells you to prepare again, not for comfort, not for warmth, just for endurance. You rise from the floor, every joint protesting. The blanket falls from your shoulders. You consider leaving it there, letting it rest. But something in you, something old and stubborn, says no. You gather it, fold it as best you can with stiff hands, and place it back near the hearth, where it can dry by tomorrow, if the sun comes through, if. This, too, is survival putting things back where they belong. You move to the door, slowly, each step like dragging memory behind you. When you lift the latch, it groans, the wood sticks, but then, like always, it gives. You step out, and the world greets you not with song, not with radiance, but with sameness. The snow still lies in drifts against the fence. The trees are brittle silhouettes. The chickens are huddled in the corner of their coop, feathers puffed, eyes dull. A neighbor's chimney sends a faint coil of smoke into the air. Someone, at least, has fire. Someone has something to burn. You don't wave. You don't call out. You just stand there for a long moment and feel the day press against your skin. And then you ask yourself, not aloud, not dramatically, but plainly, like one does when counting coins or steps, did you make it through one night? The answer is not a shout. It is not a moment of triumph. It is a whisper inside your chest. Yes, you did. And tomorrow, you don't know, but the blanket is folded. The door is open, and your breath is still rising. That will have to be enough. You return inside. There's no grand decision, no surge of will, just the turn of the handle, the push of the door, the creak of old wood beneath your feet. You settle onto the stool near the hearth and run your hands over the ash. You gather a bit in your palms and press it into a ball just to feel something with texture. That's the strange thing about medieval winter. It strips the world down to a few basic truths: cold, hunger, silence, breath. Everything else is extravagance. You hear footsteps beyond the house, the crunch of snow. A child, maybe, or the old man who walks the paths each morning to make sure nothing has frozen over too tightly. You consider stepping outside to speak. But what would you say? I made it. They would nod, then walk on, because everyone did or didn't. You open the cupboard. A tin cup, cracked, a piece of cloth, a single sprig of something green, maybe parsley, maybe a weed that snuck in with the last harvest. You sniff it. It smells like nothing, but it's alive. That counts for something. You eat the crust of bread. You drink water that tastes like the barrel it came from. You put on your boots, still damp from yesterday. You push your hair back and tie it with a strip of linen that used to be part of your sister's dress. And then, with no one watching, you do something strange. You smile, not because you're happy, not because you're warm, but because sometimes the body remembers joy without your permission. because sometimes surviving is its own form of rebellion. And in this cold, in this silence, in this life that tests you not with monsters, but with mornings that feel like stone, you've done something quietly defiant. You endured. You made it through one night, and you're still here. That, in the end, is what the history books never tell you about medieval winter. It wasn't the wolves or the war or the lack of kings that broke people. It was the nights that asked, over and over again, will you rise? And the people who answered, over and over again, yes. So, you made it. Through frost, through silence, through a night where even your breath felt like betrayal. Funny, isn't it all that we imagine when we say the Middle Ages? But most nights were probably just like this. Long, cold, and mostly forgotten. And history doesn't always echo with swords or sermons. Sometimes it whispers with wet wool and empty hearths. And maybe that's why you're still here, listening because quiet stories stay longer. If you're still awake or still pretending to sleep, thank you for wandering with me tonight. This channel, Boring History Nights, is built for minds like yours. Tired, curious, a little too aware of the late hour. So if you'd like to join again, maybe subscribe, or just leave a sleepy comment below. Tell me where you're listening from, what the weather's like outside your own window. I read every word, eventually, because even in the silence of a medieval winter, someone out there was always listening too. And now, let the last candle go out. Let the floor creak once more. Let the ghosts of frost slip back beneath the door. You've survived one more night, not in a thatched cottage, but in this strange, quiet world of memory. So close your eyes. You've walked far enough tonight. Let the floorboards hold the rest. And if you're still awake, was it a little easier this time?